Well, welcome back. What we have today is a Hacker VHF Herald. Now, Hacker made two models of the Herald. There was a standard one which only had medium wave and long wave, and then later they made this other one which only had VHF. So they never made one which had all three wave bands, which was a bit odd. They did then make the Hacker Sovereign, which we have seen in an earlier video, which did have all three wave bands. So I'm not sure quite what the market for this one was really, because this would have been late 60s when this was made, and you wouldn't have been able to receive Radio 1 on it, you wouldn't have been able to get Radio Luxembourg, so perhaps it was just for people who hated pop music. But here we are anyway. It's very similar to the Hacker Sovereign that we saw earlier. As we've seen from previous sets, and this stable only goes up to 101 megahertz, which is a little inconvenient nowadays. Quite a lot of markings on here for the different regional transmitters for the network stations for 2, 3 and 4, radios 2, 3 and 4, and then all the local stations, which had just about been introduced at that time. And you can see that we have 9 of those marked on here, which is a little odd because there were only 8 local radio stations initially of the BBC. You might also notice a rather odd distribution of them in that there's one station down south and pretty much all the rest are in the north or the Midlands. Now you might think that the reason for this was an early form of what governments now call levelling up, where you start spending money in the north of England and Midlands and less prosperous regions and less so in the south. And you might have thought, well, that's great, that's an example of how that did work in those days. It's not quite as simple as that really. In fact, it's pretty much the opposite. The BBC, at the time that the radio networks were reformed and they went to radios 1, 2, 3, 4, they then got permission to start this experiment with local radio. But the government said, there's no more money for this. We're not giving you any more license fee. You have to do this out of your existing funds. And the way they did this was to see if they could get local authorities to sort of chip in for this, to get themselves their own radio station. And the ones that did that tended to be the ones in the less prosperous areas that wanted to get a bit more publicity, or wanted to thought there was more to be gained from it. So it was the sort of self-levelling up really. Now you can see you've got Rotherham on here. There was never a Radio Rotherham. The original ones were these ones: Durham, Merseyside, Leicester, Leeds, Nottingham, Stoke-on-Trent, Sheffield and Brighton. Rotherham was simply another transmitter for Sheffield. I think because of the geography of the area they couldn't cover it with one transmitter, so if you lived in Rotherham you could get that transmitter, but it would have been the same programs as Radio Sheffield as I understand it. And all of these are pretty much still on the air, but Durham got replaced by Radio Newcastle later on when they got the station there as regards the more important city, so that's migrated to that station instead. So you can see the standard Hacker layout really: bass and treble controls, obviously volume tuning. There's no waveband selection. There is the interstation muting, which again was present on the Sovereign as an optional AFC. There's an output for tape recorders, but there's no input to go to the speaker, which the Sovereign did have. So this only has an audio output, not an audio input, and an external aerial socket. Now, with this one, it's not in particularly bad condition. The top has come off the aerial, which is a little bit annoying. The whole thing is not bad. It's not torn or anything, but it looks like it could do with a bit of Botox around here really. The handle is missing, which is a bit of a problem for reasons we'll see in a moment. And it's got the usual Hacker. I mean, obviously a lot of the Hackers have that turntable on the bottom for AM. This not having AM obviously doesn't have the turntable, it doesn't need it. So standard Hacker way of getting into it is to pull the back off here, and as you can see, without the handle this whole thing is not really held in place. It's all a bit flappy, but otherwise you can see quite nice sort of construction, huge speaker here, and bits that we use in other Hacker radios. So that's their standard audio amp board. 2 PP9 batteries needed. this FM tuner module here, and the intermediate frequency, the IF strip here, which actually, as it says here, is an AM and FM IF strip, because it's used in other radios, but in this case obviously there is no AM. And the construction is generally pretty good, as you'd expect from a Hacker really. It's all quite nicely wired up, and there's a lot of space in it, obviously, there's no AM stuff, there's no ferrite rod aerial to take up space. It's got those same favourite station things that you can unscrew and move around. So let's get a couple of batteries in it and see what we get. Right, let's see if we can get some audio injected into here. This pot here looks about the right place to do that to me. I can just about see some audio there. I mean, perhaps we should actually go around here, but let's just try sticking it on here. So we can definitely inject audio there, but I can't hear anything. I've got the interstation muting in. Let's take that off. So what I want to try and do is see if I can get any signal out of it. Tapping around it doesn't seem to do much. I can't hear anything if I put... So I take my probe here, connect that onto there perhaps, and listen around. I'm not hearing very much. That is supposed to be, look down here, this is supposed to be the input to the audio amplifier. Not getting any noise there at all from the RF side. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick a 10.7 megahertz signal around it and see if I can, if the IF stage or the RF stage is the problem. Okay, it was a bit of a struggle getting this thing apart really. There's a few seized screws, there's a little bit of corrosion here and there. So I've had to do a bit of scrunching to get things out, and some of the screws I've had to replace. But I've got it separated out, and what I did realise then was, having moved the aerial around a bit, you can actually get some signal with it, but it's very quiet. So if I actually switch it on and whack the volume up, if I move it around I can... So that's Radio Cambridgeshire, but that's at full volume. So there is something there, but it's very quiet. And as I said, that's about the strongest station, which is Radio Cambridgeshire, and that was at full volume. Which these things are always a bit difficult then when it gets to the stage where the whole thing is quiet, because you don't know which bit is quiet. Is it the front end, you know, the RF amplifier? Is it the audio amplifier over here that's the problem? I think possibly not, because if I turn it up and I put my fingers on it, I get a fair bit of noise there. So I don't think, although I will measure it, that the audio amplifier is lacking sensitivity. So we got the three bits essentially. We've got the RF input here, which you can just about see. I'll bring you in. So you can see that the RF is down here. Actually, it's picking up quite a bit from the mobile phone. So at least it's good on mobile phone reception, which is not what we want. Yeah, this is going to be a pain if we have to change any components on this RF board here, because it means dismantling it, taking out the tuning capacitor, and therefore pulling apart the tuning mechanism, probably having to replace a drive cord, which obviously is a nasty thing to have to do. There's the IF strip here, and then there's the audio bit. What I'm going to do is, I've got my signal generator on it. I'm just going to pull this out again. So if I tune it off there, and then I've got the I'll put this on 10.7 megs, which is the IF, the intermediate frequency, and try and inject stuff here, and you can see I get something there, not very much. Well, I've got this tuned properly. It's just the IF strip is working, but that's in the middle of it roughly. This is the audio end, because I can hear noises on the audio when I put my fingers on there. This is more the RF end, it's a lot louder further towards the audio end, which is not what I'd expect. I'd expect the amplification here. So I'm thinking now that possibly the problem is in the first IF stage. That will be relatively easy to change, I think, so I can unscrew that board. So let me just switch that off before I short out the signal generator. So I think the next stage really is to try and have a look at this circuitry and work out where it may have gone wrong. Right, well, I eventually managed to remove this IF board, which was a bit of a struggle, because I thought I had to undo 2 screws on the front, so I had to take the faceplate off, or the back plate that goes behind the tuning scale. Then I realised I could probably have just taken that bracket off, which would have made it a little bit easier. Anyway, I then decided to be a bit methodical about this and have a look at some of these resistors in the first stage. I did take that transistor out, that BF194, and it was fine. So I put that back in. It was measuring about 115 on HFE. The range is supposed to be like 80 to 200, so that's well within range. While I was there, I thought I'll check the resistors, and quite a lot of these resistors were high value. So I started replacing the resistors as I went along, and also replaced that electrolytic there. Nothing seemed to be wrong with the electrolytics. The capacitor looked okay, but I replaced it anyway. And then I thought, well, I might as well go through all of these carbon composition type resistors, because those are the ones that go high value. And I started going through those. And then while I got to this stage, I took the BF194 transistor out here, and the transistor tester, that's this one, the transistor tester said of this one that it was a diode, so I'm amazed we got anything at all. So that was completely gone. And now, having changed that without having finished the rest of it, which I will go back and do.
I don't mean to be rude, but I'm casually standing up,
yeah,
all in black.
We have lots of volume there on radio too.
Yeah.
You've got enough.
I hear noises, and then those 2 gas lights over the fireplace go down.
Oxford with the free kick. A really good opportunity for Sam Smith.
Yeah, we got lots of volume and lots of nice sound. So overall, I think that's going to be done. I am sort of tempted here to sort of put it all back together, but I think now that I've started doing these resistors and electrolytics, I might as well go through and do the rest of them. Now that I've got the thing apart, I might as well finish the job, really. I know that's not my normal process, but let's change our attitude for once.
Help.
The biggest songs all day long. Star Radio.
Yeah, I'm quite pleased with how this has come out, really. It makes pretty good sound. In fact, it's ludicrously loud if you wind it up, and it can get quite a lot of stations.
That's just $29.95 a month, plus no set.
Song clip, absolutely right. Enjoy your gig, have a great day.
After you left the rich kids, you formed Visa.
Maybe the cholera will keep me here.
Listen live.
Any time of the day.
All night.
It's that simple.
It all begins when you ask your smart speaker to play BBC Radio 2.
Or you could just listen to it on an FM radio like in the old days, and this is certainly one of the best ones for doing that. I've always been a bit sceptical, really. Well, I mean, you could just leave it at that, but I've always been a little sceptical when people do wholesale replacements of components in radios, as in fact I've done here with this IF module. Because I tend to think, well, yeah, some resistors are going to go up in value, but they're all going to go up in value about the same amount, so will it really make much difference? But this has really made a difference, I think, between when I first started doing it, and I, you know, did a couple of them, found the broken transistor, which surprised me a bit because, again, low gain is always a difficult thing to try and track down, because you sort of have to think and look at circuit diagrams and work out which bits are where and measure things, and I don't always have the patience for that, as you probably noticed. Usually if a transistor has gone and turned into a diode, you get nothing at all, but this one seemed to work, sort of. But anyway, having replaced the transistor, it came back a bit, but it certainly came back a lot better when I've replaced all the other resistors and capacitors. So in this case, it's certainly worth it. And as I said, massive sound from this set. Couple of little things left to do. I think the tone control, the treble control, possibly needs a pot replacing, but it's going to be quite difficult to find one that matches it. Because it only seems to have any effect right at the top end, and I've cleaned it a few times, but I think possibly it's damaged. I might be able to take it apart, but as it is, it's not too bad. It's not a major handicap, really. So, yeah, I think this is an excellent find, this set. I also discovered, through a bit of research, that there was a version of this created for the Open University back in the day. Now, the Open University, again, would have been quite a new thing in the 60s when this radio came out. And there were special versions of it with the OU branding on. They didn't have the local radio bit, but they had the Open University logo at the bottom, and they were all finished in a rather nice blue. Now, it seemed odd to me that, you know, I thought, did they give these out to students? That would certainly be a very nice present to have, even if it was temporary for a student to have. But I don't think they did. From what I can tell, they were built so that they could be used in tutorials. So when you went to the tutorial, you know, your tutor would listen to the radio program with you, and then you'd be able to discuss it afterwards. So that's what it was for, rather than to be given to students, which because these were expensive sets, really. These were the sort of top of the range stuff. As I said earlier, I didn't really see what the market was for something that didn't have AM in those days. But obviously now, with AM disappearing, and hopefully we can keep hold of VHF FM for a few more years, then I think this sort of old set comes into its own. Even if there's a little problem with it not having the top end of the FM scale, I'm finding it quite a really nice set to listen to. So I'm glad we fixed this one.